and things like that. I'll talk a little bit more about MIFA in a minute. But I am also a school counselor here on the Cape at another local high school. And, but before I was a school counselor, I worked for several years in student financial aid. So I've worked at private institutions, I've worked at public institutions, and I was one of the people who was reviewing the files and determining what students would receive for financial aid. So I have a really good understanding of the process, and I always liked working with families around how to make this work, around how to figure out how to finance college. So this is a way for me, even though I was kind of shifted gears a little bit and I'm working with high school students now, it gives me a way to stay current with what's happening in financial aid and to continue to help families with this process. So I will also add that I happen to be in the trenches with you all because I'm the parent of a 13-year-old, so that's a little ways off. But I also have a freshman in college and a senior in college. So I'm dealing with two in college right now. We skip? I don't know what happened there. Okay, so MIFA is a not-for-profit organization. They were created in 1982. And their main mission is to help families with this process. That's what they do. Their website is mifa.org. They have lots of information. I encourage you to look on their website because if you have a question, you can probably find an answer there. Lots of, they have videos, they have ways to keep track of things. It's a great website. There's a phone number here, and as he said, they will answer whatever questions that you may have. You can pick up the phone and give them a call. They also will answer emails, so that's another way to get a hold of them. And then they do these types of seminars and events, public outreach, and they have webinars. So they've got lots and lots of information on their website, and I encourage you to take a look. Okay, so we're going to talk about the types and sources of financial aid. So financial aid, what is financial aid, right? It is money to help students pay for college. And there's three main types. There is grants and scholarships, which is the stuff we all want, the free stuff that doesn't have to be paid back. And then there's work study, and there are student loans. And a lot of people say, well, loans aren't really financial aid. Well, in the college's mind and in the federal government's mind, loans are actually financial aid, the student loans are. Because they're loans that your student would not be able to get otherwise. There's no credit check, there's no income requirement. They are pretty much guaranteed to be able to borrow these loans, and they can be deferred as long as they're in school, including graduate school. The interest rate is relatively low, so they do consider them to be financial aid for that reason. All right, now the other thing that is work study, and I'll just put a quick plug in here for work study. I happen to really like work study a lot for a couple of reasons. One is that helping students to get acclimated to a college campus and feel like they are part of the community, working on campus is one of the ways that they can do that. So work study is a program where the college will put it on the student's financial aid award letter. It might be, say, $2,000 in work study. And what that means is that over the course of the year, the student can earn up to $2,000. They do not receive that money unless they put in the hours and they work for it, and they'll receive a paycheck. So most colleges do not allow you to deduct it from that bill that you get. So as a result, you have to kind of factor that in. But it's money that then the students can use for personal expenses, to be able to go out with friends, so they're not always asking you for money. So it's helpful financially and also in terms of helping the student get acclimated to their campus. The more adults that they get to know on the college campus, the more adults that are kind of watching out for them, the better. Okay, so where does financial aid come from? Well, there are lots of different sources. There's federal student loans, you'll see, is actually the biggest pot, right? But then there are also grants, both from the institutions themselves, the colleges themselves, and there are federal grants, and there's federal tax credits, there's a small amount of state grants, there are private grants and scholarships, and federal work study. So this is just sort of gives you an idea how distributed. So let's talk first about merit-based financial aid. And let me also add that this presentation is actually available on the MIFA website. So if anyone feels like they want to be able to go back and look at it later, it is on the MIFA website. All right. So merit-based aid is the stuff that students get based on some sort of ability or their grades or something along those lines, all right? So it's usually money that's awarded by the admissions office. So the student is admitted to the university and they receive an admissions letter, a letter that says, hey, we've admitted you and we're gonna give you this $10,000 scholarship. Okay, they have not looked at your family's finances. This is just based on who the student is, the grades they're coming in with, that sort of thing. So, and you need to take a look at it because it may or may not be renewable. Most of them are, but you always want to ask that question. So, is he going to get this every year that he's enrolled? Sometimes there's a limit of 4 years, so if it ends up taking the student 5 years, they might not get that the 5th year. Often with the merit scholarships, there is some sort of a GPA requirement, so they have to get good grades. And if they fall below that GPA, then the scholarship goes away. So you want to have that conversation with your student. You know, hey, you have to keep a 3.0. If you don't, we're going to have a problem. So you need to make sure you read the fine print on those kinds of awards. Not all schools offer merit awards. Okay, the state schools have some, but not a lot. Some of the, if there's anyone here who's looking at like some of the Ivy Leagues, they don't have merit scholarships because everyone who's applying to the really top-notch schools, the Ivy Leagues for instance, everyone is a really capable student. So how do they decide who gets the money? So they don't. So the merit scholarships are often used by colleges to attract certain students. Okay, so occasionally there's a separate application required. I don't know of many that have a separate application for their own scholarships. Usually they tell you if you fill out the FAFSA and the CSS profile sometimes, and we'll talk about what those forms mean in a minute, then you know, they're going to look at you automatically for all scholarships and all grant money. Occasionally there are schools that do have a separate application, so you always want to be reading the websites. The most important thing is to make sure that you look at the website for each college that your student is applying to. And also be careful of deadlines. I will probably say it multiple times tonight. You cannot miss financial aid deadlines. Missed financial aid deadlines will mean significantly less financial aid. If you don't remember anything else, remember I have to watch the deadlines. Really important. Okay? And they may be as early as November if you have a student who is, if your child is applying early action or early decision. Those application deadlines may be very early. And they should be applying for financial aid simultaneously with their admissions application. So if they're applying early action, so they've got November and December deadlines for admissions, they probably should be doing financial aid because the deadlines are probably similar. You don't want to wait until the child is accepted to college before you go through this process. It'll be too late. You got to start at the same time. Okay, the other type of aid is need-based aid. And this is the financial aid that's based on your family's financial eligibility, right? What your assets and income and things like that are, what your resources are. So, and it's determined by a very standardized formula. Okay, you're going to provide information on a form. It's going to put it through a calculation, a formula that all schools use, and it's going to give you information that then the colleges will be using. So need-based aid could include grants and scholarships, could include loans, and work study. Work study is based on need, and so are some of the loans. And the other thing that I need to mention is that in order for a student to continue receiving financial aid, they have to make academic progress. So if they have a rough semester and they fail multiple courses, it can jeopardize their eligibility for financial aid in future semesters. So it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so where does financial aid come from? It comes from federal, state, and from the universities themselves, and then other agencies. And I know from working with my students at the high school level, you know, they come into me on a regular basis, or parents will call me and say, I got to apply for scholarships. How do I apply for scholarships? I need a list of scholarships I can apply for. And the information that I always give them is, you know, those outside scholarships, the Dollars for Scholars, for instance, those are kind of the icing on the cake. They help, they definitely help. But the majority of financial aid that you receive is going to come from the colleges themselves. Okay, so there are federal grants, things like the federal Pell Grant, the federal SEOG grant, and you can learn more about those on studentaid.gov. There's a small amount of grant money that's for Massachusetts residents, for the neediest families in Massachusetts. Those are Mass grants, and they do also have some tuition waivers and loans, and of course the colleges themselves, and then the outside scholarships as well. All right, so let's talk for a minute about the loans, because almost every award letter that you receive will have a federal direct student loan on it. Now, for parents, if you went to college and you borrowed money, you probably borrowed a Stafford loan. They don't call them Stafford loans anymore. It's the same loan program, essentially, but they now call them the federal direct student loan. So these are issued by the federal government. The student is the sole borrower. So a parent does not need to co-sign. It's the student's loan. There's no credit check. They come in two forms, subsidized and unsubsidized. So the way that I try to help families remember it is to say subsidized is subsidized by the federal government, sort of. What that means is that while the student is in school, as long as they're taking at least 6 credit hours, which is usually like 2 classes, they can defer the loan, and there's no interest accruing. The federal government is taking care of the interest in that deferral period. So if they borrow $5,000 in a subsidized direct loan, and they graduate 4 years later and they go to repay that loan, it's still a $5,000 loan. There's no interest from the last 4 years. Okay, so that's a really nice benefit. Now there are also unsubsidized loans. These are not subsidized, so the interest is accruing from the time that the loan is basically put into the student's tuition account. Then the interest will be accruing. So it'll end up with a little bit bigger balance when you finish. Still a good loan program because you can still defer payment. You have the option to pay the interest as you go if you want, or you can defer the interest along with the principal and start repayment when you're required to. Now, the thing to keep in mind with these loans is that repayment happens you have a 6-month grace period after you graduate or cease enrollment, and then you have to go into repayment. Okay, so they do give you a grace period, and then if you take a year off and you end up going to graduate school, you can put them back into deferment and not pay them again while you're in graduate school. So that's the nice thing about them. But repayment is, no repayments are due while the student is enrolled, and there are a lot of different options for making repayment on the loans as well. All right, there are some income-driven repayment plans. One of the things that I like to talk about with families, and the interest rate varies from year to year. So for the 2018-19 year, for instance, it's 5.05%. I don't know what it will be for when your students start because they set that interest rate in July every year for the year, the year before school starts, the summer before school starts. So there are limits on the amount of money that students can borrow each year. So they can borrow up to $5,500 as a freshman, up to $6,500 as a sophomore, and then in their junior and senior year they can borrow up to $7,500. So if you add up $5,500 and $6,500 and $75,000 and $75,000, you end up with about $27,000 in loan debt when they graduate in 4 years. And remember that it's not when they graduate, it's when they stop going to school. So if they borrow loans the first year and they do college for a year and then they go, you know what, I'm not sure this is for me. I'm going to take some time off and figure out what I want to do. They get 6 months and then they go into repayment. So it's not at graduation, it's when you stop being in school. So $27,000 over 10 years, and the standard repayment is 10 years, ends up being about $300 a month. So I often have this conversation with families because I have students all the time who will say things to me like, it doesn't matter what it costs, my parents said that they would help me borrow the money, and then when I graduate I can take over the loan payments. Okay, well how much are you going to borrow and how much can you reasonably repay? So $300 a month is doable for most kids when they get out of school. But if you start adding on additional loans, additional family loans, you need to just keep in mind that your student may or may not be able to take over those payments. So when you commit to borrowing that money, keep that in mind. That's what I always say. This should be a family conversation. This should be students and parents talking about what's financially feasible for your family. So we're going to talk about the application process. So, financial aid timeline. You want to make sure that you check deadlines, as I said. The best way that I've found to keep track of all this stuff is, I've done this with my own kids, and I tell my students to do this all the time. Make a spreadsheet. If you have another system that works for you, that's fine. I like spreadsheets. You make a spreadsheet, you list the college name, maybe some important things about that college that you like, maybe the size, where it's located, the majors that they offered, whatever is sort of the priority for your child right now. Make columns for all that stuff so you can compare them. And then you're going to put in what are the admissions requirements. Do they need 1 letter of recommendation, 2 letters of recommendation, whatever it may be. And then what are the deadlines for admissions. And then as you move through the process here, you can put what are the financial aid requirements and what are the financial aid deadlines, because they're all going to be different. And it will be very hard to keep track of them all if you don't do it in one place somehow. Okay, so this is just College Application Manager. This is just an example of a way to manage it. It's sort of like a spreadsheet. So they have a College Application Manager on the MIFA website. So you can do that, or like I said, you can make your own spreadsheet, whatever works, but you need to find a system. Okay, so the big form that everybody has to fill out is the FAFSA. That's the free application for federal student aid. So the FAFSA is available starting October 1st, so you can't fill it out tonight, but on Monday you can. And They did introduce something new this year, and it is a mobile app. I have not tried it, obviously, because it's new and the FAFSA is not available yet. I have 2 in college, and I'm looking forward to next week doing one of their financial aid forms on the website and one on the mobile app so that I can better tell you which one is easier to use. Right now, I cannot tell you. Either way, you are going to need to have what's called an FSA ID. And you can apply for the FSA ID now. You could go home and do this tonight. And what the FSA ID does, fsaid.ed.gov, it's an electronic signature, and it's what you're going to use to log into your FAFSA, so that you can start working on it and then leave it and then go back to it and finish it, or make corrections or whatever you need to do. So you have to set up these FSA IDs first. You need one for the student, and you need one for one parent. So if there are 2 parents in the house, you don't need 2 for the parents. You just need 1 parent to get one. They're going to ask you for things like, your name and address and social security number and birth date. You have to set up some, some of those questions. What was your first pet's name, kind of thing. Some security questions that you set up. And all of it gets sent off, and what they're doing is they're looking to verify that the name and the birth date and the social security number and other identifying factors match. And then they'll come back, and it can take 4 or 5 days sometimes for it to come back and say, okay, your FSA ID is ready, now you can use it. So that's something you can do now, so that then when you're ready to fill out your FAFSA, it's there. And like I said, that is how you will do an electronic signature. The other thing that's interesting that they started a couple years ago with the FAFSA that makes it much easier than it used to be is the IRS data retrieval tool. So if you didn't have a complicated situation with your taxes, you didn't file an amendment, or you didn't file a foreign tax return, or there's a few other situations that can kind of foul it up a little bit. If you had a basic tax return without any issues. When you're filling out the FAFSA, it will ask you if you want to link to the IRS and take the information directly from the IRS. And that's the easiest way to fill it out, because then all you need to do is say yes. It will take you over to the IRS website where you will verify that the information is correct, and it will ask you if you want it imported into your FAFSA, and you say yes. And it will take you back to the FAFSA website, and all of your tax data will be there. Your adjusted gross income, taxes you paid, okay, it all gets populated into the FAFSA. So it's great. So it's easier for you, and the financial aid offices like it because they know that it's the right data because it came directly from the FAFSA, directly from the IRS, and there's no potential for human error there. You will have to fill in some other information. It will ask you what parents' wages are. And they'll want you to, if there are two parents involved, they'll want you to break down what parent one's wages were versus parent two wages, because that information is not on your tax return. Okay, your income for two parents would be combined and the adjusted gross income, but there's no way to break it down. So you'll have to do that on the FAFSA. You'll have to put in asset information. So there are still things you need to put in, but it makes the process much easier. Let's see, and there is a FAFSA webinar recording on the MIFA website that also answers some questions that people often have. All right. So what is on the FAFSA? They're looking for student citizenship status. You list which colleges the student is applying to. And if you are not sure that you have a complete list and you want to get this done next week, you can go back in and add colleges later. So maybe there are 2 colleges they're definitely applying to, so you want to get it done. So go in and do those, and then once it gets processed, you can go in and make corrections, and you can add colleges and reprocess it, and those additional colleges will then get the information. So it will ask for parents' information. Are they married? This would include same-sex parents. They're going to look for all parents who live together, married or not. So if you have biological parents who just were never married, but they're living in the same household with the student, then they want both parents' income information. Okay. Divorced, separated, they want the custodial parent. So, and there's often questions around, well, who's the custodial parent? So the general rule is, who does the student live with the most? Well, the student's pretty much equally split between the 2 of us. Okay? So who provides the most financial support? That's the person that should fill out the FAFSA. And whichever parent that is considered the custodial parent, if they have remarried, if there's a step-parent involved, then that step-parent's information also needs to be included on the FAFSA. It's looking for parent and student income, and for students starting in September of 2019, it's looking for 2017 income information. It's going to use your tax return from 2017. And it's also going to be looking at your parent and student assets. This will be things like savings, checking, investments, and other property. You will see that your home is not, your primary residence is not on here. The FAFSA does not ask you for home equity. A lot of people don't understand that and think that it does. They don't. They don't care about your primary residence. They want to know if you have a second home or you own other property of any kind. But not your primary home does not get included here. 529 accounts get reported as, those are the college savings plans. If any of you have those get reported as investments. Investments on the parent asset section. It's also going to ask you about the number of people in the household and how many of those children are in college. It used to be that you could, if a parent was in college, you could include that as the number in college for the family. They stopped doing that. Now they want to know how many children are in college. Okay, so other financial aid applications. Every college is going to need the FAFSA, and there are a few that will need another form also, in addition. This is the CSS profile. This is This is actually a product that's put out by College Board, the same people who do AP and SAT. They also offer this financial aid form for colleges to use. This one, unfortunately, is not free. This one will cost. But it's generally for those colleges that have a little bit more of their own money, all right? None of the state schools are going to be using this, so if you're applying to UMass Lowell, UMass Amherst, Bridgewater State, they will not use this because they don't have enough money to justify using this. But if you're applying to private schools and they have enough of their own endowment money, they want more information. The FAFSA doesn't actually collect that much financial information. So in order for them to have a better picture of your family's financial situation, they will ask you a whole bunch more questions on this CSS profile, and that is what the colleges will determine, how they will determine how to use their money. It doesn't change your eligibility for federal and state money because that's based on the FAFSA, but they can use this information to decide how much of their own scholarship money they're going to give you. And there's a webinar about this as well on the MIFA website. Occasionally, colleges will also have their own financial aid application. I don't see that a lot, but that's where checking each website, keeping track of each college's requirements is really important. The CSS profile, just like the FAFSA, is available on October 1st as well. And there's actually, if you Google CSS profile participating colleges, you can get a list of the colleges that will use it. But I still always tell people just double check on the college's website. Just look at the financial aid section and make sure that you haven't missed anything. So you fill out the FAFSA, you fill out the CSS profile if it's required, and the colleges are going to receive the data electronically. The student is going to receive something called a Student Aid Report, the SAR. And usually it comes by email, occasionally it comes by mail in certain circumstances, but the majority of them go by email to the student's email address, whatever the student reports as their email address on the FAFSA. And this is I like to just take a minute to talk about this too. So you're moving out of the high school arena where if something is happening, the high school contacts you. If they need something, they contact you as the parents, right? You know what's going on. The colleges are now going to start dealing with your student. They don't really want to talk to you. This is your student's education, and so when they need something, they're going to reach out to the student. So you need to be careful about which email address that you use, because if your student is not good about reading their email, okay, they could miss something. So the financial aid office gets your forms and they say, you know what, we really could use some more information about whatever it is. We need a copy of their tax returns. They send an email to the student, not to you as the parent, but to the student. The student doesn't get that email, doesn't read that email, doesn't send those tax returns in, you may not be eligible for the same amount of financial aid because they didn't have a complete application. So your student has to monitor this. There are a couple of ways to get around this. I did this with I wish I'd done it with my first one. I learned my lesson. So I'll tell you the trick that I used with my second one, which was great because he is not an email reader. And that is that I set up a separate email account. And it's just a Gmail account. He had the password. In fact, he would check it sometimes. I would know because he would occasionally say something to me which told me that he had indeed read the emails. But we could both monitor what was happening. So when he filled out whenever he filled out the little postcards at the college fairs, he used this email address that we set up. Whenever when he took his SAT, he used this email address. When he filled out his financial aid forms and his admissions applications, he used this email address consistently. All of this stuff went there. Because if you haven't already started getting inundated with a huge amount of email and mail from colleges, okay, it's absolutely crazy. And if they're using the same email address that they're using for school, for instance, and they're trying to sort out all of these colleges advertising and all of this with their important schoolwork every day, it becomes hard to manage. So if you can help them manage some of this stuff, that's great. And so this is where also, if colleges need something, if they're missing something, either the admissions office or the financial aid office, you're also going to see the email if you're monitoring this email account. Okay, so just a suggestion, but I found it worked for us. So, and the other piece of this is once they get on the campus, again, the colleges are not going to talk to you as the parents. If you call them at the end of the first semester and say, what were my students' grades? They're going to say, I can't tell you that. Well, what do they owe for next semester? I can't talk to you about the student's bill or the financial aid. Okay, the only way that you will be able to get information, even if you're the one paying the bill, is if the student says you can have the information. For the most part, that's going to be on their website, and they will have to go in and electronically sign a release form, which says, you know, yes, this person can have access to my information. My oldest child, we sat down and did that before he went off to college, and he said, yeah, you can see the bill, yep, you can see financial aid. No, you don't need to see my grades. So that's a family discussion that you have to have. All right, so you will apply. And the other thing is, a lot of people think the FAFSA determines financial aid. They don't. The FAFSA, the colleges determine financial aid. The FAFSA is just a tool that the colleges use. So when you fill out the FAFSA, it's going to put all of your information through this formula, and it's going to spit out a number called the expected family contribution, or the EFC. And that's what the colleges are going to use to determine your eligibility for financial aid. Now, sometimes there are special circumstances, right? First of all, they're collecting 2017 income information. Well, maybe you got laid off this year. Maybe your income this year was way different than last year, right? Because who knows, something could have happened. Maybe your family has a lot of medical expenses. You know, sometimes there are things that are affecting your family that there's nowhere you can put that on these forms. So that's where you need to reach out to the financial aid offices and let them know what's going on. A lot of them will have forms to fill out to say, you know, I lost my job, my income for 2018 is going to be a lot different than it was in 2017. They'll say, okay, that's fine, here, we're going to send you this form that we need you to fill out, or go to our website and download this form that we need you to fill out, and then they may ask you for some documentation, you know, pay stubs, or, you know, whatever it may be. You send that in, and they can use their professional judgment and do an override and use 2018 income instead, if that will make a difference for your family. So whenever you have a special circumstance like that, it's worth reaching out to ask those questions. Okay, the other thing is that a certain percentage of students will be selected for verification, which is sort of like an audit, but not really. You know, people worry about making a mistake on the FAFSA. Well, if I make a mistake, I'm going to be in big trouble, right? No, this is not like doing your taxes. This is different. Colleges know that you are just ordinary people trying to fill out these complicated forms, and that mistakes happen, and that's okay, and they'll help you correct them. That's sometimes why they'll collect more information so they can make sure that they do it correctly. So don't be afraid of these forms. But the other thing that happens is that the federal government says, you know, you have to verify a certain number of applications. So you may be asked to provide a tax return or a tax transcript or other documentation. There may be a verification form, which seems like it asks you all the same questions that you already just answered on the FAFSA, but you have to do all this stuff. They're just verifying that what you provided is the correct information. So they're going to determine your financial aid eligibility after reviewing these forms. So the first thing that will happen is that they will look at the cost of attendance. Now the cost of attendance is going to be different for every school. Cost of attendance is made up of the things in blue on the top are the things that you're going to get billed for. So you'll see a bill for each semester. You don't pay for the year, you pay by the semester for most colleges. First bill is usually due in July or August, and the second bill is usually due right around the holidays in December or January, which can be tough. Okay? So you're going to get billed for tuition and fees and room and board. But they add some things to that you will not get billed for, but you will have to absorb. Things like books and supplies, transportation. So if the student is going to school in California, you have to plan for that, right? How are you going to get there and back? How are they going to come home at Christmas? Whatever it may be. And personal expenses. Everybody's got to have deodorant and toothpaste, right? So, and clothes and whatever else. So they add some of these things in, and they come up with what is their cost of attendance. So their cost of attendance is higher than what you're actually going to get billed, because they're adding in these other things. Then they're going to take that expected family contribution, and the expected family contribution, most people when they fill out the FAFSA and they see that EFC for the first time, they go, are you kidding me? There's no way we can come up with that money. That's the reaction of most families. But what it is not so much, if they say your expected family contribution is $10,000, that does not mean that they expect you to go to your savings account and take $10,000 out and give it to the college. It's more an estimate of what your family could absorb for paying for college. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later also. But the thing to keep in mind is that the colleges really see the family as the primary source of paying for college. They give you financial aid, but the responsibility is, the first responsibility is the family. Also, the expected family contribution is not necessarily what you will pay. So if your expected family contribution is $10,000, and you go, okay, we can do $10,000, we're good. The reality is that you're probably going to pay more than that, because most colleges cannot meet 100% of a family's financial need. They just don't have the resources. So it's a rough number, and again, it's just a number that's used to determine eligibility. The other thing is that if you have more than one child in college, it actually benefits you in some ways. You have to pay for 2 in college. But that expected family contribution, there's 2 parts to the expected family contribution. There's a student contribution and a parent contribution. And the parent contribution is divided in half. So it will reduce your expected family contribution for each child, and in theory, make each child eligible for more financial aid. Now, if you're curious about what your EFC might be, and you're either, maybe you're a junior parent, or maybe you're not ready to fill out the FAFSA yet, then there are some EFC calculators online that you can go in and plug in your information and see what your EFC would be. There's one, College Board has one, and also the FAFSA Forecaster on fafsa.gov. The other thing that some families find helpful are something called net price calculators. Net price calculators are required, the colleges are required to have one on their website. So you will find one on every college's website. Usually you'll find them in either the admissions or the financial aid section of the website. And it allows you to go in and enter your family's financial information. It's going to ask you a lot of the same questions that you'll see on the FAFSA. It might ask you for your child's GPA and SAT scores, because they're getting at whether they might be eligible for some merit scholarship money. They will try and collect some demographic information right up front. They'll ask the student about, what their name is, or, But you can page past most of that. You do not have to provide any identifying information when you do these. So you can just go in anonymously, you can put in your family's income and assets, and it will give you an estimate of what your family might pay. So it's a very rough estimate of what you may be eligible for financial aid for that particular school. There are a lot of factors that go into financial aid, so it's impossible for them to say this is definitely what you'll get, but here's kind of an idea. And in my experience, if you do a few of them on different college websites, you kind of start to get a sense of how colleges are going to view where you are in terms of income and assets. So it can kind of help you prepare a little bit. And it might also help you make some decisions about which colleges your child is applying to. Because if there's some that are just like, well, there's no way we could ever get there, financially, so maybe that one needs to come off the list, possibly. Or at least convince the student not to fall in love with it. And I say that to students all the time. Do not fall in love with a college until you know how much it's going to cost you. Okay, because otherwise, there's a lot of heartbreak there. Okay, so what else about net price calculators? They will usually give you both federal and institutional aid, and they may include the merit scholarship money as well. Okay, so the financial aid office is going to take that cost of attendance, which was the billed costs, plus the other expenses, the travel and personal expenses and books. And so that's the cost of attendance, and they're going to subtract your EFC, and that's what your financial aid eligibility is. So cost of attendance is $50,000, your EFC is $10,000, you have $40,000 in financial need. And then they're going to pull money from various sources to try and meet as much of that $40,000 need as they can. So families often are concerned about assets and, well, what if I've been saving? Is that going to hurt my child if I've really been saving for a long time for college? The answer is no. You're always better off to have saved. And this slide really demonstrates that. The FAFSA and the EFC is very income driven. The assets are just a small piece of it. So if we have three families, their income is the same, but they have very different assets. You can see what it does to the expected family contribution. So a family that has managed to save $150,000 only has an EFC that's about $7,000 more than the family who has saved nothing. So saving $150,000 would be definitely the way to go. Obviously not everyone can do that. But don't be afraid to be saving for college. Yes, it will have an impact, but it doesn't have as big an impact as a lot of families think. And this is because the assets are not looked at directly. I mean, there's asset protection allowance. It's based on how close the older parent is to retirement, and it's still only a percentage. And they recognize that parents can't pull every asset to help with college. Now, this shows you how income has an impact on the expected family contribution. So if you have families that have the same assets, but their income is quite different, you can see what it does to that EFC. It makes a big difference. So it's really your income that's going to drive this more than your assets. Okay, so how does the formula work? Well, again, this is a graphic that sort of shows you, and it's probably really hard to see the colors. There's a small blue box that's consistent across the bottom. That's the expected family contribution. So here's a family with an expected family contribution of $5,000. And they've applied to 4 colleges. The student has applied to 4 colleges. One of them is a really expensive private school, right? And then maybe the one on the end is community college. And there are a couple of kind of in-between ones too. And so you can see the green is the financial need. So your EFC stays consistent, but how much financial need you have changes depending on the cost of the college. So here's another way to take a look at this. This is sort of picture a barrel, right? So when the financial aid offices are looking at your information, they need to fill the barrel. They're going to try and get you as close to the top of the barrel as they can. So the first thing that goes in always is the expected family contribution. That goes in the bottom. Then they may have heard from the admissions office, the admissions office offered your student a scholarship. That's great. So $9,500. So that merit scholarship, that goes in next. Then they're going to put in maybe some more grant money that's maybe need-based. So that goes in next. Then they'll put those loans in, $5,500. And then they'll put some work study in, and there's still $7,500 of unmet need. So they could not, that was all that they could offer you. So this family is responsible not just for their EFC of $5,000, but also for that $7,500. So you're talking $12,000. So it's just something to keep in mind. The EFC does not necessarily tell you what you're going to have to pay. Okay, so here is a graphic on the how award letters can vary. So if you look at this student applied to 3 colleges with an EFC of $5,000, and the colleges package things a little bit differently. So one put in more scholarship and grant money than others. So it's just some sample packages. So the other thing, and I like spreadsheets, I said that already, but the other thing that you're going to want to do when you start getting these financial aid award letters is to create a spreadsheet and put in what is the cost of attendance. And you should be able to find this on the college's website. And for me, when I get to this point, I want to know, what am I going to get billed? What am I going to have to send to them for money, right? So what are the tuition, fees, room and board? So that goes on the spreadsheet. And then how much grant money did they get from the college? So you got columns for each college, right? Cost of attendance, the grant and scholarship money, the loan money, and then what's left over. And if you break it down that way and look at each item, line item on the award letter, it will make a big difference. Sometimes I've sat with students and done this exercise and they've gone, oh, so that one's the least expensive. Yep. You can't tell unless you break it down this way. So here's another one. Same thing, EFC of $5,000, cost of attendance of $45,000. But what you will see is 2 of these colleges have packaged in a parent loan. So they make it look like they're the same as other colleges. But that parent loan is a loan that you have to borrow, or you have to find the money from some other source. And a lot of these parent loans, most of them, are based on credit. So if you've had a problem with your credit, you may not be able to get these loans. So you have to be really careful. That's where, I've talked to families where, wow, look at, I got this great financial aid, we can do this. Okay, well, what is the financial aid made up of? Oh, there's a $30,000 parent loan in there. I didn't see that. You have to look at each line, break it down. Okay, so a little more about paying for college. So remember we talked about the EFC being how much you can absorb, and that's really how the colleges are viewing this. So it's maybe, for a lot of families, it's going to come from a combination of sources. It's going to be, so maybe we have a family who's got a $20,000 balance. Well, how are they going to manage that? So we've got student savings and summer earnings. $1,500 comes off. Parents have been able to save some money, so maybe they're going to put in $4,000. So that's past income. Then we can look at present income, and that's payment plans. Almost every college will offer a 10-month or 12-month payment plan. So you can take whatever the balance is and divide it by the number of months, and there's no interest, and there's usually just a little fee, like a $65 enrollment fee, and then you get to the end of the year and it's paid. There's no interest. And so for some families, if you can pull some money out of your monthly budget, this is a good way to supplement it as well. And then future income are loans. So what are you going to be able to do over the course of time in the future? So most families have to do a combination of these things. Okay, past income, present income, and future income in order to make this work. So additional financial aid considerations. So think about the number of children that you're going to have to send to college. If this is your first child and there's 2 or 3 more, how much of your savings can you put in? How much are you able to borrow? And keep in mind that you're going to have to do this for 4 or potentially 5 years, and then you've got to do it for all of the other children. Think in terms of total enrollment and total debt for you and for your student. Consider the post-graduation monthly loan payment, and there are loan calculators out there. I know there's one on the MIFA website, for instance. You can put in, the amount that you would borrow and what the monthly payment would be over how many years, and so you can get an idea what that would look like. Have your student take a look at what the starting salary is for the career that they're interested in, whatever they're going to be studying. Is the student thinking about going to graduate school? Are they going to have to borrow more money for that? So if that's the case, do you want to take on a lot of debt as an undergraduate? Know your credit score in case you do need to borrow a family loan, a parent loan to help you with this. And then make sure, like I said, that you compare each college's net price. What's it really going to cost you after you deduct that student loan and the scholarship money, and you don't consider the parent loans? And you know, what are you going to still have to come up with? And so what I always advise my students to do is to make sure that you're applying to a wide range of colleges. And I'm sure the guidance counselors here are saying the same thing. You want to make sure that you're applying to schools where your student is going to be accepted, of course, but where maybe there are some where they're going to be a really strong candidate. Because colleges ultimately are trying to attract a certain kind of student. Remember that colleges are business, right? They're a business. So they want their, and there's all of this rankings and ratings and whatever, and they want their rankings as high as they can get them. And one of the things that affects those rankings are GPA and test scores of their incoming class. So they're going to try and attract the students with higher GPAs and test scores. So if your student is only applying to schools that are kind of reaches for them and they're kind of on the bottom of the accepted student profile, they may not do as well in terms of financial aid. If they put a couple of those dream schools on, and then they also put a couple of schools where they're really strong, maybe even at the top of the accepted student profile, and that college goes, you know what? We really want to attract more students like you. We want students with higher GPAs and test scores, so we're gonna give you a little more money than we would have a student who had a lower GPA. Okay, and then you should also have what we call a financially feasible school, and for most families that would be a state school, you know, a UMass or Bridgewater, Framingham, Fitchburg. There's several of them, right? They're still expensive. UMass is almost getting ridiculously expensive. But for most families with some help from financial aid, you can figure out how to make the state schools work. And so having that range of schools on there is really important. And what I tell students too is, you know, whatever that financially feasible school is, it needs to be a school that you know that you could be accepted to and that you would feel comfortable attending in case those private schools don't come through with the financial aid. So I advise against the students, well, I'll just throw one of those on just in case. Well, make sure you visit it, make sure that it is a place that you would be comfortable with. All right, and also make sure it's a school you could be accepted to. UMass Amherst has become very difficult to be accepted to. They're really selective. And so if you're a student who's a good student, you know, but you know, maybe you're a 2.530 kind of student, and you put UMass Amherst on as your financially feasible school, and that's the only school, you may not get in. So it might be good to put a couple of state schools on as well. Okay, so paying for college in Massachusetts, you have options there. If financially you get to the end of this and you go, we just can't figure out how to make this work. You know, a lot of students like to start at Cape Cod Community College or one of the other community colleges. It's an option, and they have some great transfer programs. I encourage you to look into those if you think this might be something that your family needs to consider. There's also a program called Tuition Break. If your student is interested in some obscure major that is not offered at any of the state colleges and universities here in Massachusetts, but it's offered at a college or university in New England outside of Massachusetts, they can get a tuition break. They pay a similar amount of tuition, in-state tuition, for that particular major. So that's another thing. If the major your student is interested in studying and you can't find it at any of the Massachusetts state schools, take a look at this, and your school counselor can help you with that. There are some free resources out there. Okay, so learn about financial aid. Yes. The financial aid offices. Rely on those. There are people there in the colleges, in their financial aid offices, this is what they do. They help people figure this out. So talk to them. Ask lots of questions. How do they treat private scholarships? This is a question I often get. You know, so I get this financial aid award letter from the college, and then my child gets a $2,000 scholarship from, you know, a local scholarship. How is that going to affect the financial aid? Is it going to reduce the amount of aid the college offered, or is it going to be added to the amount of financial aid? And different colleges will handle this differently, and it will depend on your situation financially and on the package that you receive from the college. So there's a lot of factors, but that's a question that you can ask. Okay, ask about special circumstances. We talked about that already. Can you appeal your award? You can ask. There's been some articles out there in the media about bargaining and things for financial aid. I will tell you, I was just at a meeting with a whole bunch of financial aid people from colleges all over the state. And we talked about this, and the colleges really hate that word, bargaining or negotiating. I'm going to negotiate my financial aid. They don't like that. When they go out with a financial aid package, they want your child to come, and so they're going to send you as much money as they feel like they have the resources for, and also depending on how much they're trying to attract your student. There's a lot of factors. So negotiating, not so much. Appealing, yes. So again, if there's special circumstances, okay, if you narrowed it down to a couple of schools, and this school is just, they haven't given you as much as this other school, but your child really likes that school, it's always worth asking. But you have to be careful about how you ask it. I find that what is generally the most successful is if you can prove to the college that you've got a plan. So, okay, I have a $5,000 gap, and I'm not sure, I've already exhausted the parent loans. I'm going to do a payment plan for this much, because this is what my family can afford out of our monthly budget. The student's working this summer, and they're putting in this much. But there's still this $5,000 gap that we just can't seem to figure out what to do with. Sometimes they'll come back with some more money. It might be $1,000 or it might be the $5,000. But if you've demonstrated that you've thought through these other resources that you have, that's going to be a lot different than the letter they get from someone that says, we need more money. Okay? It makes a big difference how you approach it. And so sometimes they will have a formal appeal form on their website that they'll ask you to fill out. Sometimes a student will have to write a little essay about why they want to come to that college and what additional money would do for them. So there's all different ways that the schools do it. Try and meet in person if you have questions or concerns about financial aid. A lot of times when you go for open houses, accepted student days, tours, you can make appointments with the financial aid office as well. And you can always email them too. So there's lots of different ways to get in touch with the financial aid office. There's national and community resources. We have a FAFSA day coming up. You don't know when that is, do you, Sean?
Don't.
You meant to look it up.
Yeah.
It will be at Upper Cape Tech, and it's usually in October. You can, if you're really nervous about filling out the FAFSA by yourself, you can go to this. It's on a Sunday afternoon usually, and there will be people there that will help you fill out your FAFSA and get it submitted. They won't do it for you, but they'll show you how to get started, and they'll answer questions that you have as you go through. Educational opportunity centers, unfortunately we don't really have any here on the Cape. This slideshow is used all over Massachusetts, so schools that are closer to Boston, this would apply more. And then for scholarships, there's a couple of resources here. Fastweb.com, that's a resource for looking at larger national scholarship programs. Another one called goodcall.com. MIFA has some scholarships on their website, mifapathway.org. So those are some more scholarship resources. MIFA also offers some after the college acceptance seminars. There's usually one here on the Cape. I think it alternates years between Barnstable and Dennis Yarmouth, where you can bring your award letters, and now you've got them in front of you, and you've got lots of questions about Pell Grants. What does a Pell Grant mean? What does this mean? What does that mean? And so being able to hear all of this again, now that you've got your financial aid award letters in front of you, helps, and they kind of start to talk a little bit more about, well, what do you do to make up the difference? Okay, and those will be in the spring, usually in March or April. And so one of the handouts that you got tonight was an evaluation that I would love it if you would fill out, but also on there is a place to put your email address. And if you do that, and I send these off to MIFA, and they put them into their database, and they don't share your email addresses with anyone, but they use them to send out newsletters, and they're usually very timely newsletters on topics that are relevant for right now, whatever's happening at this point in the cycle. So if you're looking to receive some regular updates, some information, feel free to provide your email address. Certainly not required to, but I think the newsletters are pretty good. Okay, and MIFA also has the webinars on their website. So what do you do now? You're going to sign up for MIFA emails if you'd like to. You're going to get a FSA ID for the student and for the parent. And the interesting thing is you want to make sure you record what these are somewhere safe, because you're going to use them again. You have to apply for financial aid every year. It'll be easier the second time around because you will have done it and you're only applying to one school, unless your student's transferring or something. But for the most part, that second year is usually easier. But you do have to apply every year. And you will use these FSA ID numbers again next year, and the year after, and the year after. The other thing is that if you have another child coming along, the parent FSA ID is unique to the parent, not to the student, not to the application year. So if you have 2 kids in college and you're signing their FAFSA, you're using the same FSA ID as the parent. The student will have their own, and then you as the parent just has the one that you use on both applications. So research deadlines and required applications. Sign up for webinars if you're interested. And after next week, get started on those applications. All right, so that's my name, Deb Hempel. So, any questions? I went through that pretty fast, so I'm happy to answer some questions.
The CSS profile I saw up there, so I'm divorced, remarried. Am I filling it out with my information, my wife? And I saw up there, non-custodial, so
Good. That's a great question. So the FAFSA only collects the custodial parent's information and if that custodial parent has remarried. So if you're the custodial parent, you've remarried, you're going to provide your income information and your wife's income information. That's it. The CSS profile, the private schools want to know, they want to see the whole family's financial situation. So they want more information. They're going to collect a non-custodial parent form, which asks for that non-custodial parent's income information.
Is that on that same form, or she goes on?
She will go on separately, so that you will not, neither of you will be able to see each other's financial information. They will get submitted separately. Okay? Yes. Yes.
The difference between, I've looked at a lot of different parent loans versus a student loan. Does it make more sense where parent loans have the fees, the interest is higher? Does it make more sense of getting a parent loan or getting a student loan, co-signing a student loan that you can defer, and then you help pay that student loan down the road?
Yep, that's a good question. And that's going to be up to your individual family and the loan program. I always tell families, start with that federal direct loan. It will be on the award letter. Start with that. Then if you need more money on top of that, then yes, there are lots and lots of different loan programs out there. MIFA offers some loans as well. They actually do have a student loan that will need a co-signer though. They'll need a co-borrower. But it doesn't have to be the parent. So if as a parent you've got terrible credit, and, it's just not going to work. But there's a grandparent or an aunt or uncle who said, well, I'll help out. They do have those kinds of programs. So you're going to have to compare interest rates, repayment terms, and yes, and how your family chooses to do that is up to you. If you want to borrow the money for them and then help them out repaying it, that's fine. And for a lot of families, if you're trying to save for retirement also, then how do you balance this, right? Other questions? Yes?
The additional cost of books, transportation, meals, are they tax deductible?
I'm going to say no. I think when I don't know enough about the tax laws, so I don't want to say for sure, but I believe that for the tax credits that you receive on your tax return, I believe there's actually a 1099-T that you will get from the colleges that says how much money you pay to them. So I think that you have to look at the tax laws to be sure, but I think it's just those direct costs that are part of the tax credits. Other questions? Yes?
If you're lucky enough to be old enough to be retired, Is there any difference in the way they do the formula?
No, so is there any difference in the way they do the formula if you've retired? The answer is no, mostly. Although, as I said, when they're looking at assets, one of the questions on the form is, what is the age of the older parent? Because they are looking at how close are you to retirement, or are you in retirement, right? And that affects what percentage of the assets get looked at, okay? Also, the other thing is that if you've got retirement investments, those do not get included on the FAFSA. So the other investments are, but not retirement. Now, the CSS profile will ask you for information about your retirement investments. So,
But I have a quick question.
sure.
I have a unique situation. I'm a single parent, not married and whatever, and I adopted
Yep.
the child. And when you go on the FAFSA form, they keep wanting to have the other parent, and it's like, excuse me, there isn't one.
Right. So I would check in with a couple of the colleges that the student is interested in and see how they want you to fill out that form. There's different ways that they're going to approach that, depending on the exact situation. But I would definitely refer you to the individual. Call a couple of them. If your child's applying to 8, you might not want to call 8 of them, but maybe pick a couple of the top 2, give them a call and say, hey, I've got a unique situation. How should I be filling out this form? Okay. Other questions? All right, I'm going to stay around for a little while if anyone has anything that they wanted to ask that they didn't want to ask in front of the whole group. I'm here. If you could leave those evaluation forms, that would be really helpful. And thanks for coming.